Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. I'm your co-host, Ted Jenkin, here with my co-host, Lee Heisman today. As always, every week on the Shrimp Tank, we often bring you entrepreneurs of all shapes and sizes, blue collar, white collar. We talk about how to start a business, scale a business, and grow it. And on the Shrimp Tank, every single week, we try to give you that combination of street smarts and also book smarts so you can get your MBA in entrepreneurship. As always, if you're in your car or you're going to download us, get us at Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, anywhere on the internet you can find the Shrimp Tank podcast. You can always go to our YouTube channel, which I recommend. You can see our some 1,000 videos of people we've interviewed. Dave Wazalewski was the COO of Spanx, and Brian Dawkins, Hall of Fame safety for the Philadelphia Eagles, Tony Horton, P90X, the Williamson brothers, one of the biggest sellers of barbecue sauces in the country, and so many more. This is where you get all the goods from literally the people who are delivering the goods every single day. We thought that we'd take this episode and do something a little bit different. We have on Jordan Margolin today, who's a new business development expert for VSS. They're a private equity company, because we get asked, Lee, all the time, what's private equity all about? So Jordan, tell people just a little bit first to just start here. What is VSS? What do you do? Because you guys are a private equity company.
Yeah, Ted, Lee, great to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on. So we are a New York-based private investment firm. So we're really focused on investing in companies in the healthcare, tech-enabled business services, and education sectors that are generating anywhere on an EBITDA perspective from $3 to $15 million. We will write checks anywhere from 20 to 50 million, and that can either be, a control transaction where we're buying north of 50% of the business, or more of a minority recap or growth equity investment where we're taking less than 50% of the business. But at the end of the day, we're focused on, backing owner-operated, really founder-owned businesses on their next stage of growth. So they've reached an inflection point. They want to acquire maybe a competitor, build out a sales team, expand management. We're there to help support that vision, both from a capital perspective, of course, but also from opening up our network and expanding our relationships through the companies that we're speaking to. So great to be here.
Jordan, go back, most business owners, they think of two things. They say, what's my top line?
Sure.
And what's my bottom line? I always joke and say the GUI center, it's never nice. Most owners aren't self-evaluating their business on a monthly, quarterly, or sometimes even a yearly basis. They're just growing. But you mentioned a popular term, and you mentioned EBITDA. You mentioned that's what's important to your firm. And Ted and I know it, you know it well, but would you mind talking to viewers out there, business owners, to explain what that is and why it's so important to you?
Yeah, definitely. So, EBITDA really stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation. That's an important piece, because a lot of times we get stuck on the net income number, but there are some, factors in there like interest expense or taxes that we want to strip out. That EBITDA number, for some firms is maybe not important. If you're a software business, a lot of times we talk about ARR growth, and that's the magic number. I think a shift we've seen in the market, maybe in the past 12 to 18 months, is this sentiment around profitability being extremely important. If you rewind back the clock, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was all about grow. But now I think investor sentiment across the board has become more focused on, what are you actually earning? A business might be growing immensely, but if you're not taking home any cash at the end of the day, are you all that sustainable? So it's an important metric that I think a lot of firms key in on.
So, for somebody who is building a business now, what would you recommend them in terms of the things to get together before they would even approach any private equity company, let alone yours? Like, what do you look for to basically say, yeah, this company's buttoned up? Is it all in the numbers, or are you looking at other stuff?
Yeah, no, I think the numbers are really important. But what I always say is you can massage numbers, you can't really change people. So at the end of the day, it's a people business, it's a relationship business. So I think having that strong management team, having defined roles and responsibilities, but also goals, right? You should have a 1 year, a 3 year, a 5 year, a 10 year plan. Are you somebody that wants to stick around with your business and carry through that growth for the next 10 years? Or is your desire, you're a little bit later in life, you want some liquidity and you're looking to hand the keys off to somebody else? So I think having that both short-term but also long-term vision that's consistent across the organization is super important. And we have the same mindset as a private equity firm, right? We're always thinking about what's our 1, 3, 5, 10-year goals. So I think having those benchmarks is really key. I would also say you want to have the house in order, right? There's going to be a lot of questions that a private equity firm or any potential buyer is going to ask. So having clean financial statements, or at least a clean accounting system that you can point to, whether that's a cash flow statement, income statement, your balance sheet. We're going to want to see those things. Do you have key customer relationships that you might have long-term contracts with? We'll want to know the nature of those contracts. So, being immensely organized at the front end rather than having to play catch up when you get those questions, I think is super important.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of business owners, and Lee and I have seen this as we've helped people transition their companies, is that a lot of businesses look at the recurring revenue, but you need to be able to explain to people what your customer makeup is going to be. We find this in all these deals, and a lot of business owners don't really keep that. And then they get the question from the private equity company. So tell us about your customer list. It's like, I don't know. I got to go find that. It's really good to get yourself squared away that you not only know your revenue, but you know where the revenue came from. No?
Definitely. And, to that point, I think one of the quick things that a lot of private equity firms will look at is that customer concentration. So do you have a majority of your revenue coming from 1, 2, 3, 4 different customers? Or are you, selling services or products to 100 different customers? So we're going to want to know that breakdown. And if you do have some concentration and, 50, 60% of your revenue is coming from, one customer, that can be okay, but you want to be able to show a history of growth with that customer, a loyalty they have to your business. So having that information ready is going to be pretty key.
Well, not only a loyalty, Jordan, but also a contract. So a long-term contract that, it helps exponentially. Now, I do have to take us a little off the serious track that we're speaking of, but I will tell you, in my years of working with private equity, and Ted and I were joking with you earlier on the show that in our early 50s, we feel our age, right? And we feel our age more and more when we're on the call with private equity across this entire country. I will tell you, your firm, and you're a young man, but your firm is one of the few firms that has some, I'll talk gray hairs like I have. It isn't just this firm of 20-something years old, 20-something year olds as I deal with across the country with different firms. Talk about the diversity amongst your firm and its management team, because I do see different sects of all different people at your organization.
Yeah, really great point. I think just from an experience perspective, we've been around a lot longer than some other private equity firms. So we actually started out in the early 1980s as a media-focused investment bank, where we were doing a lot of cable deals, broadcast deals, television deals, no podcast deals. They weren't around at the time, but sure we would have looked at you guys if we happened. But essentially, we had that experience in banking. We said to ourselves, we know this industry really well. Why don't we start our own fund? So in 1987 was the first private equity fund from BSS. At the time, we were called Barones Schuler Stevenson. Fast forward to 2005, that's really when our particular strategy shifted, both from an industry perspective, but also the way we invested. So those first 4 funds that we had in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s were really pure buyout vehicles. So only doing control transactions, buying north of 50% of the business. 2005 is when we said to ourselves, there's really a need in what we call the lower middle market for founder-owned businesses where, maybe you're a founder who's sensitive to dilution, you want to stick around, you're excited about growth, and you don't want to do a control deal. You might want to do more of a minority recap or growth equity situation. So 2005 is when we launched our first structured capital fund. Fast forward today, we closed our 8th fund back in December of 2022. So I think the history, the experience of, some of the folks on our side is super important. But we also understand we want a diverse skill set. So I think where you find some of the folks coming from that join our firm, it's really across the board. Some folks come from more of an investment banking background. Some were in venture capital prior to. One of our principals here actually was at Optum previously, so more in a corporate development, so having that industry experience. So I think, if you're a founder and you're looking at any private equity firm, similar to my point before, it's always about people. You want to make sure there is a level of comfort with the individuals you're working with. I think having that diverse skill set, diverse background here, has only been advantageous for us.
How do you guys go about raising your money? And you got to raise $500 million
Yeah.
for a fund. Is it dialing for dollars, or do you go to institutions? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, it's, for us personally, it's a real kind of split, right? So you got your high net worth individuals, your family offices, your insurance companies, your pension funds. Again, I think our track record has helped us personally because we have this history to lean on. As a first time fund, it might be a little bit harder if you're going out to fundraise. But we have a mix of, both US investors and also international investors. And again, I think having that history, being a firm that's been around for a while, luckily, if you're an investor in the prior fund and the returns are good, you're trying to come back for more. So we've been able to hang our hat on that a little bit.
So Jordan, real quick is, it sounds like you have obviously your structure and framework of the type of industries you're looking for. You're not trying to eat everything on the menu. You have your niche and I call it the swim lane, which it makes you really good at what you do. You sound very well versed, as we know your firm is. Give me knee-jerk reaction. What's a mistake that you've learned from, where you've either learned from it personally in this space, where I've seen many firms that get into a new sleeve or a new industry, they make a few mistakes, maybe they overpay, maybe they're not doing due diligence appropriately, and you get better and better after you make those mistakes. But what can you recall off the top of your head was something where you said, "Ooh, I made a mistake," and also what did that mistake cost the firm or cost yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe for me personally, I think it's something where we're always trying to provide value to folks, but at the same time, founders know their business better than anyone. We're not trying to come in and rewrite everything, so to speak, or be there on a day-to-day basis to dot the I's and cross the T's. So I think being an active listener to founders and understanding their needs and wants is super important. In my role in new business development, where I'm speaking to founders often, I think something early on in my career in this job was, I'm always trying to tell you what the right thing to do is or solve the problem for you. But sometimes it's a little more important to take a back seat and be a better listener, right? And let the founder kind of come to that realization for themselves.
You see, Ted, I've noticed, and I looked at your hand, Jordan, you're not married. Is that accurate?
I'm living in Manhattan. I'm a single man in Manhattan. It's a fun but expensive experience.
Well, the reason I was going to say that is it sounds like you're prepped and primed to get married when you're talking about not coming up with a solution and just listening to the founder. That's our, being as old as we are in our marriages, it's not about, I'm here to solve the problem, hon. Let me just listen to you solve the problem yourself. So that's wise words.
It's really funny you bring up that example because I think, a founder trying to find a private equity firm as a potential buyer is kind of like dating, right? You shouldn't go on just one date and fall in love right away. You should do your due diligence, so to speak, and see what's out there, have conversations with multiple folks, and then you'll get a feel for, how this private equity firm will act in a quote unquote marriage, right? Some are a little bit more operationally minded, where maybe they have an operating partner bench and they're looking to drop in a new CEO. Other folks, take more of a back seat and want that founder to have their vision, and they're there more to supplement and support. So every private equity firm is going to come at a transaction or a potential deal in a different way. So I think the best way for any founder to prepare for that is to have multiple conversations and meet multiple potential partners.
Jordan, how important do you think it is for an owner to get a business valuation? Because sometimes business valuations could say one thing, but dependent upon the appetite of a company like yours or other ones, what the business valuation says and what the business will be bought for will be a lot different. But do you think it's important for an owner to do that?
Yeah, I think it can definitely help. I think any private equity firm down the line is probably going to do their own, what we call quality of earnings report and make sure that's established. There's always a middle ground in a negotiation, right? It's a negotiation for a reason. So there are, a bid and an ask, and you got to find that middle ground. So I don't think it hurts. Is it 100% necessary? Maybe not. But by doing that valuation exercise up front, you can kind of get the house in order and prepare yourself for the questions that are going to be asked if you do go down the line of diligence in a transaction. But at the same time, it's a cost benefit analysis. That's gonna cost a little bit. But if you're serious and you think you're ready to
Right.
embark on that
Right.
next step in the next 6, 9, 12 months, then it can definitely be worthwhile.
Jordan, what is I keep asking about failures, right? Because everybody can listen to the good stuff, but give us a story or give us a painful experience where maybe your firm yourself spent months doing a deal. It's near the finish line. How close to the finish line? You're starting to laugh. How close to the finish line did you get one time where it fell apart, and it just kind of tell that story?
It's a recent wound. You're bringing up recent memories.
Okay,
here.
I would not have said that if I knew that. I'm sorry.
I won't name names, but I think this is a good example where we were involved in a transaction. We had done a fair amount of diligence. Call it 2-3 months or so, and it ended up falling apart. Really in the ninth inning, kind of a week or two out from close. But I think the sticking point of why it fell apart, it wasn't the numbers. The numbers were fine from our perspective. It was that emotional piece. I think the founder maybe wanted one thing, communicated another, and wasn't as upfront about his intentions of wanting to stay on in the business that we had initially thought. So I think that goes to a pretty important point, is just being transparent, both as a private equity firm, right? We're always trying to be transparent as to what we're looking for and how we're thinking about the business, but also as a founder, establish what your real goals and desires are prior to jumping in, with an investment bank or a business broker or an advisor and running a process. At the end of the day, you only want to stay in something that you're excited about. And it's really the people piece that I think more often than not is why deals don't work, but also why certain deals work really well. Yeah.
What's a career path for somebody getting into this? Is this a kind of job that they start getting right out of college? I mean, what kind of roles can somebody play if they go to work for a PE firm?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me personally, I went to Tulane for college down in New Orleans, which was a great time. Stayed a fifth year, which most folks can't last 5 days in New Orleans. I lasted 5 years. So loved it down there. Started out in investment banking right out of college. Did that for a couple of years at Sandler O'Neill. When I was leaving investment banking, I said to myself, I did admission work in college. I always enjoyed giving tours and speaking to prospective students and families and more of that relation-driven mindset. So initially I thought, hey, I'll go do investor relations perhaps and try to fundraise. Realized pretty quickly, for the first couple of years of your career, you're probably not out on the front lines raising money. You're more so making some PowerPoint decks. But then I discovered this business development function in private equity, which if you rewind, 7, 8, 9 years ago, really wasn't a thing. It used to be, hey, you're an investment associate or you're investment principal. Half your time is going to be spent diligencing opportunities, creating pitch decks, doing modeling. And then the other half will be actually originating and speaking to founders or investment bankers about opportunities. In the past couple of years, you've found the need for individuals like myself to really dedicate all of their efforts to sourcing, to having conversations with founders, to developing investment theses. So I've really enjoyed it. I found it to be a way to build my own network personally, but also get in front of a lot of smart people across different industries. I don't find myself personally being pigeonholed. I get to go 1,000 feet wide and 100 feet deep, as opposed to maybe 10 feet wide and 1,000 feet deep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
My role specifically, just to add to that, is there's no set path. A lot of folks come from more sales-oriented roles at firms that sell into private equity. Other folks come from investment banking like myself. So it's a newer niche almost within private equity that I don't think is going away. I mean, if you fast forward 10 years from now with AI and just the developments that are happening on the technology side, some more of that manual work, the modeling, the PowerPoint making, that might get replaced. But what we're doing now, relationships and speaking to people and getting out there, technology will never replace that. So I think it's a very valuable function at most private equity firms today.
Jordan, can you speak a little? People talk about valuation, as Ted said, if they should get a valuation. We always joke and say the market speaks about the valuation. That's just a piece of paper, somebody behind a desk putting a valuation on it. But in our experience, we know there's multiple ranges, that multiple of EBITDA that you speak of, and some are industry specific. Bigger is better. Size does matter. And it's a reason that private equity feels more comfortable because it's a more sustainable business. But I have experienced many industries and many different multiple ranges. What I can't get my mind wrapped around is when I have fintech clients, financial technology services, because 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 to me sometimes. As you said, it's off of a top line instead of a bottom line. I know firms are looking for maybe minimum EBITDA numbers at that point. But can you help me understand that isn't linear to me when it comes to technology? Can you elaborate on PE's and your firm's perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. So, SaaS, that's a term that's thrown around a lot, software as a service. I think if you're a pure software company and it's 100% contracted annual recurring revenue, that ARR, then the expectation is that the multiple that's being paid is going to be based off of that top line revenue number. VSS as a firm, we're typically looking for profitability. So you might be making 40 million of ARR, but if you're burning 2 million of cash each month, it's probably not a great fit for us. I'm sure there's, a number of VCs that'll line up to support you, but from the private equity perspective, at least where we sit, not as much of interest. You mentioned, different industries are going to have different multiple ranges. That's always shifting, right? 2021, as an example, was a year where there was some very frothy valuations. I think across the board, generally speaking, we've seen things come down a bit from there. I think if we look back, 5 years from now, in my opinion, 2021 will be a bit of an outlier year, both from a deal activity perspective, but also from a valuation perspective. I think what we're seeing in the market right now is a bit of a renormalization and a reset, so to speak, in terms of not just activity and deal volume and folks looking to transact, but also from a valuation range. So I'm not going to put hard numbers, on anything because that's always changing. But from where we sit, that EBITDA, that earnings is usually the number we're keying in on.
What's the funniest thing you've ever seen happen at a close? You ever see something super funny at a close or no?
Oh man, that's it might not be the time and place to share those stories, but that's a good question. I mean, I go to a ton of conferences, right? That's a big part of my job, is going to both industry specific conferences, but also capital connection conferences, we call them, where private equity firms are meeting with investment bankers. I hate to bring up dating again, but it's essentially speed dating where I'll talk to a banker for 15 minutes and then on to the next one. And if it went well, we'll follow up with a second date and talk more deals. I do remember one time we were at a conference out in San Diego and was speaking to a founder of a business. I was trying to pay attention, really listen to what he was saying, but on the screen right behind him was the keynote speaker. It was like Bill Gates was speaking at the conference, and you're kind of diverting your attention. Again, you always want to be the best listener. So I had one ear on Bill, one ear on the founder. Don't ask me what the founder said, but it was definitely.
That's funny. Well, this is great, man. Well, in general, people that are watching the Shrimp Tank today, is there a good way that they can learn more about VSS and learn about what you do, the portfolio, everything you guys do in healthcare, education, MSPs, and across the board?
Yeah, it's perfect timing actually. We're launching today our refreshed website, vss.com,
Wow.
so you can check it out there. But in general, I encourage founders to always keep their ear to the ground. As I said, speak to multiple private equity firms, speak to people that you trust to get a better sense about what's going on in the market. And also understand, there's this, I just want to bring up one point around kind of a platform, so to speak, or an add-on. So you might see a lot of times, and I had mentioned, we look for platform companies that are, 3 to 15 of EBITDA, for example. But our current portfolio companies are always looking to be acquisitive and partner with like-minded businesses that can join that platform. So you might be early on, you might be making 500K of EBITDA, a million of EBITDA, what have you, but you might be a great fit for a portfolio company of a private equity firm as well. So you're never too small. Size matters, but I think private equity is always going to be knocking on your door.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great today, man. We appreciate your time and giving us some insight, behind the scenes, what happens at a private equity company and how founders should be thinking about it. I think this will be valuable for the business owners that build those 3 to 15 million EBITDA type businesses to be able to get in front of you, but valuable for anybody who's selling a business.
Yeah, definitely. Well, really appreciate you guys having me on. And we were talking about it before, but 3 Jersey guys getting on the same Zoom, something interesting is going to happen. So I appreciate it.
That's exactly right.
Sure.
Yo, we'll all just end up and say, yo, good seeing you today. Thanks for talking to you.
Forget about it.
Exactly.
Well,
Wonderful.
it's great stuff.
Oh, go ahead, Ted.
And appreciate your time today. And folks, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Shrimp Tank.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond.